Welcome back to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game. I'm one of your hosts, DM Neal, aka Jote Maniac, and today DM Chris and I are sitting down with Greg Tito and Shelly Mazzanoble from the official Dungeons & Dragons podcast, aka Dragon Talk, and we're going to be talking about their book, Welcome to Dragon Talk, which I actually have in hand, even though it doesn't come out until December, because apparently if you buy it directly from the actual publisher, it comes way faster. It's a wonderful book, and honestly, the intro is a super valuable tool to have someone else read to better understand what Dungeons & Dragons is and can be to the countless of people that love it. We get into that and so much more, but before we do, I have an Apple podcast review, and this one comes from Sam Skull, entitled Straightforward DM Talk, 5 stars. Keep up the great world building material and useful tips. DMs Chris, Mitch, Neal, and friends. You are always welcome at my table. DM Sam. DM Sam, thank you for that review, and hopefully we share a table and rolling those math rocks at one point or another. But with that out of the way, let's head to the meat.
I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meat?
The flat meat's back on the menu, boys.
So today on the meat, we have 2 returning guests. One, it's only been a couple weeks. The other, it's been a couple years. But we have Greg Tito and Shelly Mazzanoble, the co-hosts of Dragon Talk, the official Dungeons & Dragons podcast. And thank you both for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So excited.
Yeah, I have not been on a podcast with either of you at this point. So this is my first time getting to have both of you on here. So I don't feel like I can ask the first question, Neal. I feel like it's got to be you that asked the first question.
So as I stated, it's Shelly. It's been only a couple weeks.
Yes.
And Greg, it's been a couple years. But what have you both been up to? Let's say lately, and it could be anything. It could be how fun your home games are, the fact that maybe somebody started actually running some games, or just anything you can come to mind.
Mm-hmm. I have been doing something quite fun, actually. That is reading The Wild Beyond the Witchlight, because I am going to DM that for a wonderful family that lives in my neighborhood, a family that recently adopted my foster dog. And they have two young daughters, and the dad and the older daughter have expressed interest in learning how to play D&D. Got to do it. And I thought Wild Beyond the Witchlight should be a really fun adventure for them, because it's a carnival. We're going to start at the carnival, and we're going to play some carnival games. But I also love the whole, like the story hook of like, you were here once before, and now like, there's like all that like mystery and whimsy. Like, I'm just going to drop them back at like the ticket booth, and they're going to be like, how did I get here? I only have like vague memories of being at the carnival before, but they had an item that they had lost and they're trying to find it. And like all the really cool NPCs are coming back. And I just like any spare time that I have, I just have my little Wild Beyond the Witchlight book tucked under my arm. I'm like, I'm just going to read it and take notes. I am finding it so inspiring though, as like a fledgling dungeon master, because it was designed to be new DM friendly, and it really is like, it's just like pluck a little from here and pluck a little from here. And I don't anticipate us even getting into the Feywild during this one-off that we're gonna do, but if hopefully they want to continue playing, because I mean, who wouldn't want to travel to the Feywild, especially if you were an 8 and a 10-year-old girl? You don't want to go to the Feywild?
The Feywild terrifies me. I had players that were just in the Feywild in my home game, and it terrifies me.
What terrifies you about? Tell me. I need the...
Everything has an ulterior motive in the
I know,
Feywild.
that's what's so cool about it.
Everything. Oh, trust me, as a DM, I love it. But you asked the question, would you want to travel to the Feywild? And I'm like, absolutely not. I don't want to go.
Like on the surface, if like, it's the land of fairies, and they'll be like, yes, take us to the Feywild. And then...
Oh, they will love it. They will love it. And you can make it into whatever.
Yeah.
You don't have to be like, all right, and now I'm going to eat you. You don't have
I don't have to do that. But I have like pages of notes, which I hope isn't a bad idea, because I have gotten caught up in like over preparedness, but I don't want to forget all the cool stuff that can happen.
Someone put it really well recently, because I think there were a lot of people over preparing for a long time, and I don't think over preparing is bad. I think it's how tightly you hold what you have prepared.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was my problem.
Like, you can have mountains and mountains, but as long as you're not like death gripping that these things need to happen, and that all of it could be, and none of it is meaningless because it prepared you for the moments you see before you, but you got to be okay with maybe none of it happens.
Yeah, and there are so many story hooks that I want to like make sure I'm not putting too many of them in there, and then it's like we actually don't know what we're supposed. Are we supposed to find a lost displacer beast, or are we supposed to like find the doll that I lost 8 years ago, or what's happening? Because they're new; they've never played before.
Right, and the beautiful part is you could run that scenario multiple different times and have different outcomes each time, depending on what players decide they want to go after or what hook actually hooks them in.
Yeah. And like when in doubt, I also like overfeed people as well. So like at least they'll leave my house thinking like, I don't really know how to play Dungeons and Dragons, but the food was really good. And so I bought all this cotton candy and kettle corn and these, I think they're just marshmallows, but they're marketed as unicorn poop. So obviously I had to buy those too. And so I'm going to like turn the whole thing into like a carnival experience. And I got like butterfly wings and maybe even a funny hat for me to wear. As
you hired a guy with a spinning thing and a monkey meat who can dance.
We have balloon animals. We have face painting. I have Chris. Yeah. I hired Chris Perkins to come over and be Mr. Light, and it's going to be great. Is he the one in the unitard? Because that's the one.
Yeah, yeah, right. I was gonna say
this is a weird.
Is this a Wizards of the Coast expense, or is this a?
This is an abnormally high bar that you've also set.
Just how we do D&D in my house.
Yeah, for the first. Yeah, there you go.
And then they'll go like play D&D at somewhere else, and they're gonna be like, "Wait, where's our cotton candy? What?"
Yeah. Where's our unicorn?
Where's the live unicorn?
Now we're playing at Greg's house, and all we have are toilet rats. Like, come on,
this is way scarier.
Yeah, right.
That's how you get into the Feywild, through Greg's toilet.
Just gonna jump right in.
Yeah.
A friendly rat will escort you. He's like, "Hello, join me."
Alice in Wonderland has the white rabbit that it chases.
This is the white rat.
There's another story hook now. I want to do it all.
It was a white furry rat that was in my toilet, just so you guys know. It had like a brown spot on its shoulder. Like, it was actually quite beautiful.
I think there's a reason why people like C.S. Lewis, who have people travel to different areas or different dimensions, never use toilet rats. I think
there's a reason why.
I love it.
Oh, man.
Oh, that's great. Well, excited to hear how that
goes. Me
too. Shelly. Greg, what have you been up to over the past little while?
I don't know if I can live up to that amazingness. I'm working on a short film called Ex-Husband. It will be complete very soon and be hopefully in some film festivals that people in various cities will be able to check out. It is pretty exciting. That's been a lot of the last year or so has been working on this 15-page script and getting it up to speed for shooting. And then we shot it in August. And now we're in the post-production phase of talking about music and sound effects and editing and all that. And so it's been really fun to go back to, using that part of my brain and making a short film. So that's been really fun.
Can you give us like the verbal trailer teaser of what the film is about?
Yeah, it's about a high-powered woman executive who lives hard and fast and is kind of a jerk in her mode of speaking, but in a funny way. It's a black comedy. And then she gets some really terrible news and has to reevaluate all of her vodka-spiked lattes that she drinks right before board meetings and all that, and see if there's a better way out there. It's about 15 minutes long. And, so it packs in as much, drama and comedy as it can in those 15 minutes.
And sometimes those short films do that in a much better and more succinct way than some of the longer films do.
For sure. Yeah. Right. You got to wrap it up quick, right? Because you only got, beginning, middle, and end needs to go really fast.
Yeah.
It's like
every facial expression, every mannerism, like has something behind it because it has to.
Totally. Yeah. Economy of dialogue for sure.
The other question we have, and you're already starting to lead into it, is there anything else that you're working on, and knowing the two of you, that you can tell us about?
That we can tell you about?
Maybe a book
I
or two?
Is there something
Oh.
about Dragon Talk coming out? Like
you
in
mean
January
this
or
book
something
that
like
I'm
that?
holding in my
That's awesome.
hands? Feel the pages. Like
Yeah, maybe you want to like plug that or something. You know.
Well, so great. Yes, we got
I
our
got mine
copies.
too. I know.
We got
Yeah,
our
matchers.
copies yesterday, so we're so excited.
No, I don't have.
That would be amazing. Greg and I co-wrote a book called Welcome to Dragon Talk, which is a book of essays about some of 29 or so conversations that we've had with people on Dragon Talk and the ways that it has impacted us and inspired us, and just shows a really nice breadth of this amazing D&D community and the people who love this game. Greg's actually a lot better at that. The
No,
pitch-
I was going to say that was fantastic.
Oh, because that's
Yeah.
that's not usually, I don't usually say that part, but that's just but yes, that's coming out December 5th, and it's available for pre-order now. And there are at least 2 copies in the wild, one at Greg's house and one at my house right now. But it was so cool to actually see it. Look, there's like words and stuff in it.
Whoa!
Look
It
at all
might just
those
be
words.
Lorem ipsum in there. For all we know, but you know. No, I'm just kidding.
We had this prop
I'm-
made.
Yeah, it's just a prop.
Yeah, just for this Zoom call where nobody will see it because we're a podcast. There you go.
Yep.
I'm curious because you said there were like 29 essays. Are there like, if you had to choose like one in there that you both are really excited about people reading, what would be maybe one that,
Oh.
you're most excited for people to read? I'll repeat myself.
Gosh, we love all of our essays equally. As well as our podcast guests. We've been highlighting a bunch of them over the last few weeks and people that we've been talking to. So now I want to make sure I highlight one that we haven't talked about a lot. So I love Shelly's essay with Alicia Marie. And that conversation, mostly the one thing that I can't constantly remember about her interview is that she's bionic. She has implants in her ears that connect to Bluetooth to be able to allow her to do the podcast. So she was not wearing headphones, but she had our voices in her ears bionically. But she was an amazing person, right?
Yeah,
I was really
and she's
excited about.
an amazing cosplayer, and she had like all of these mannequin forms behind her, and the call, it was like kind of creepy. But
That was my first thought. I didn't want to. I'm glad you said it.
it reminded me, like, have you ever played Betrayal at House on the Hill?
No,
There's
but I've
like
seen trailers for it. Yeah.
One of the scenarios was about creepy mannequins, and I just saw it and I was like, oh, how do you sleep at night with them in there? But she manages. They're just her people, her friends. Yeah.
Now, that's a great one. And then, is there another one that I think that we haven't talked about too much? Is Adrienne Palmer, I guess. She better known when we were talking to her as Ember Moon for the WWE. And I just love that there was this connection between professional wrestling, which is kind of, I was never a fan of wrestling, so I kind of go into the essay where I didn't really love all of the tropes around that when I was a kid growing up. And in talking to her and how much she was a D&D fan, I realized just how close those two pastimes really are, right? Like, you are taking on a persona and putting on a good show and making sure everyone has fun and is safe throughout the entire process. Beating people up while also having the illusion of combat and stakes be very high. It literally is playing pretend in a ring in front of thousands of people sometimes. And I think that's actually very similar to Dungeons and Dragons and how you're just, everybody is on the team working together to tell this story safely for everyone, as well as her personal journey of manifesting that career path where she wanted to be a wrestler because she saw wrestlers and she made it happen, and fell in love with D&D along the way because of how close they were and how it's this great bond between her and her husband. in playing D&D. So yeah, I loved that essay and her as a person.
That is a perfect segue to the surprise question I have. Little did you know. No, this one's not that bad.
This kept me up at night.
There's
so
a lot
nervous.
that have been more harrowing than this one. But I think we can all just let's all just say that D&D takes the top spot in the fandoms that we all appreciate. But what is that second spot? For like, you've got D&D, what's right below it? Because I know for me personally, just to give an example, it's fantasy football in just about every single form. But I see so much of like being a fan for D&D and learning everything I can and reading everything I can. And oftentimes, you have that language that is a shared language. Often when you talk to someone where you realize they're into fantasy football, because nobody has any right to understand like what a third string running back for a team is, unless they really love one team or they play fantasy football. Those are the only reasons. Yeah. So what's that second spot for fandom?
Shamelessly, mine is Bravo Television. I love The Real Housewives. I love everything on Bravo. And that is like my community. My Google News feed is populated with just speculation and articles. Did you hear what Lisa Rinna said to Lisa Vanderpump? Like, no, I didn't.
But
Tell
I
me
do
everything.
now. I want to know.
Yeah.
I listen to podcasts that recap all of the shows that I literally just watched. And I'm like, God, as I'm watching, I'm like, I can't wait to hear what they're going to say about this scene.
Yep.
I read all the articles, the podcast, the Facebook fan groups. I'm in them all. And it's just like this sweet little escape for me when it has no impact on my life. It's just fun entertainment. And I just can just lull myself to sleep listening to people recap what happened on Below Deck Mediterranean.
That's awesome.
It might not be Bravo, but my wife loves the Kardashians. So similar
Yes.
fandom. I get it. She's all in.
See?
What about you, Greg?
I'm going to pick an equally divisive topic, but baseball. I really love baseball. I am astounded by how much content they produce. There's 162 games in a year. It's constantly having something to be in my Google feed and see what happened with the Boston Red Sox. That's the team that I follow the most. But the good thing about being a Red Sox fan is that when the Yankees are good, you have someone to root against the entire time. So now, go Cleveland.
Yep.
Or where I guess are they playing the Astros now?
They're playing the Astros now, yeah.
Yeah, right. So go Astros.
We
even though
definitely want
that feels a little bit bad for many reasons. But
circa 2017 bad, yeah.
yeah, right, exactly.
Circa like last week bad.
That's a hard one.
Yeah,
right.
too, yeah.
But anyway, I love following all of that. And I think baseball is oftentimes thought of as like the most boring sport out there, but I love it almost for that reason, because it's something that you can have in the background while you're gaming or doing something else. And when there is high moments of drama and tension, like during the playoffs or something like that, like it becomes all that more exciting because you've lived through the mundanity and the ups and downs of the entire season to get there. So it's a slow build. And if you pay attention to it, it almost feels like a fantasy journey, right? Because in taking the ring to Mordor, there was a lot of boredom along the way, and that's to me sometimes is what Dean.
That's a great analogy for my Tigers. I'm gonna say they're bringing the ring to Mordor, and it's just taking them a really long time to be relevant again. So every year for baseball, I'm like, they're probably gonna be garbage. Yeah. So I don't know what the thrill of October baseball is like. So.
And you can throw lots of money at it and have the Eagles take them to Mordor, but that's not real. You can't actually.
That's fun. We give all of our money to really old players like Miguel Cabrera. That's what we do.
So I too am a Sox fan, and I have to tell you, it's because I went to a game in Fenway and I watched Big Papi put one over the Green Monster, and I was done. That was it. There were no more questions. I'm in. I'm all in.
If you see that in the cathedral of baseball that is Fenway Park, there's nothing better.
And so I'm all in. So we'll segue back to the topic at hand. So one of the bigger questions I had with how much content you have produced through Dragon Talk, like where do you even start? And I assume this is a question you asked yourselves, and thankfully you've answered it in the process. But where does someone even start? Because I think of I think of a lot of shows and a lot of things that can look backwards at their back catalog, even if it's a person's home game. If you think of just the staggering amount of Critical Role or anything from Dimension 20 or even our own back catalog, I think it's an interesting question to hear your perspective on, like, what are those first steps of looking back at the things that you've made?
When we made the book proposal,
wait, yes. How did we do that?
We had the pitch. That was the funny thing, is that we had a pitch from the editor at University of Iowa Press that was like, hey, do you want to write this book? And we're like, yes, we do. And then we had to think about, how does that actually work, right? How do we write about this podcast? And so one of the first things we did was create like a short list of guests that we wanted to write about. We wanted to kind of focus more on the community of guests that we've been able to speak to. And what we found with those lists that we made from memory, just from like, oh, I remember this being awesome, and I remember this one being awesome over the years in the past. We weren't necessarily about them being awesome or good. It was how much of a connection Shelly or I had personally to the story that was told during that interview. And so that actually ended up being kind of a guiding light for us in how we would write the book, because many of these essays were ones that we could add more story to, or add more background or information, not just rehashing what was said in the interview, but adding a little bit more about each of us and our personal journeys through D&D or through life, and how this interview either impacted us or just the connection to this person's story, was echoing our own, right? And so it ended up being a really easier process than you might think, because we focused on these stronger connections, right, Shelly?
Yes. And we didn't really even have a lot of crossover on our lists, which was very strange. Like, we had each come up with a pretty long list, and there was maybe one or two names that showed up on both lists. So it was very easy to just parse it out that way.
Yeah.
Now, are your structures of the essays, are they all fairly similar? Like, did you have like a main way that you were planning on writing with like a point at the end of like, this is how it affected our life? Or is it just a recap of the experience with said person? How are those essays kind of structured if somebody was going to go through and read it?
So we tried to, so it's not a transcript, I should say, of the episode. Like, this person said this thing and we laughed, and then we talked about this. It's not like that necessarily at all. Every chapter, you'll know if it was written by Greg or myself. And it is just like we talked to this person. This is what they do. This is a little bit about like what's their connection to D&D. But they kind of organically, that there was this thread of like, this is why this person resonated with me. This is, or like Greg said, like, we had a similar experience, or this is the personal essay part of it really just kind of organically came through. And when we were talking about why we felt so connected to this person, or why we felt so inspired by the work that this person was putting out there, that kind of thing.
I took a cue definitely from Shelly's mode of writing. It's similar to her bachelor recaps, as well as the two previous D&D books that she has published. And once, I think you might have written one of the sample essays first, and I was like, oh, okay, I can do that. I can, model that voice. Obviously, it's my own voice. It's not Shelly's, but like, I was like, oh, I get this kind of casual nature that we have similarly with guests when we talk to them on Dragon Talk. We always try to put people at ease of being like, no, we were just chatting. Like, this is just friends talking about something awesome. You don't necessarily have to feel nervous because it's just us, as if we were getting to know each other at a convention or something like that. And so I think that casualness and that feeling of wanting to be, genuinely interested in people's stories comes through in all these essays.
We did want it to sort of feel like the podcast. And that's why there's a lot of footnotes also in there. You haven't seen the book, so you don't know this. There are footnotes in there where it's like Greg is commenting on the essay that I'm writing, and as a way of him also expressing things that stood out to him. And we got super into the footnotes. Like, we were just
like a whole separate book.
It became like our way of communicating with each other. We're like, that was really funny. Footnote. Oh,
it's like the Google Doc where you would make suggestions on the side.
Yeah, we were yes-anding the entire time.
Our editor was like, I love the idea of the footnotes, but there's about 90% too many of them in here.
Oh, God.
I'm going to pare them down unless they're absolutely
Shelly, it's
necessary.
great that you thought that was funny.
Yeah.
Let's cut it.
Just send you back an example page. As you can see here on this page, the footnotes are larger than the rest of the page. We can't do this.
Yeah.
This book is now 800 pages long.
I had to pull out my Bill Simmons book of basketball to show, be like, no, people do this sometimes. Where and I was like, oh, his footnotes are almost half of the page and have completely non sequitur stories involved in just the footnotes. And so I was like, people do it. I like it. It's funny, right? And they're like, not as much.
Yeah, it's either the most daunting thing because I think back to my college days where you flip the page and you see that level of footnotes and you're like, this is the worst. Or you have that banter.
And then we didn't look at it, let's be real.
Or that banter back and forth where it's one of the best things.
Nested stories.
Yeah. It's interesting also because having an editor on a book like this, because I've only done things where I've had an editor on more crunchy mechanical things and making sure that commas are placed and verbiage is correct, but like having an editor trying to find that throughput voice, how did that process go? Because you're having both Shelly your voice and Greg yours as well, but finding it to make it more cohesive. Like I assume that in many ways that editor has such a prominent role with that back and forth, and then also curbing the footnote enthusiasm.
Oh yeah, I think that Greg's voice and my voice do blend together very nicely. Hopefully that is like why people enjoy listening to Dragon Talk too. Like the way I write and the way Greg writes is very similar to like listening to Greg talk on the podcast or listening to me tell you why I love the Real Housewives. It is all very, it feels like we want the book to, as you're reading it, that you can hear Greg is actually telling you the story in your head. And same with the essays that I wrote. She didn't have much feedback on like the voice. I think she knew what she was getting from us. She had read my 2 previous books, so she knew, like, she was very familiar with what she was going to get out of me, and she was also a Dragon Talk listener, so she knew the whole vibe of the podcast and how Greg and I interact with each other.
So shout out to Meredith Stable for guiding the whole process around this book, and I think where she really helped and shaped it was making sure the essays had context, right? And so I think that was really important. I don't know if we really considered it right away, but like the idea that people are going to pick this up who may not know D&D even. And so that's why we start off with a roundabout explanation of what Dungeons & Dragons is. As you know, it is very hard to just encapsulate in a paragraph, let alone a sentence. And so we spend a little bit of time trying to illustrate exactly what it is for people who may not know. Obviously, it kind of sets the tone for the kind of jokey casualness that follows throughout the entire thing. And then I go into a bit of a history of Dungeons & Dragons from the 70s to now, focusing on the community and how the community has shifted and changed, while also giving the context of like, okay, this edition started here, this edition did this edition did that, and then how culture was changing also. So the idea in the 2000s about how you could be internet famous in the D&D world and how that shifted and changed. And, everybody had a you guys included, a DM name that they had for their online handle, and how much that kind of changed and shifted the conversation around things. And so we provided all that. It's about 30 pages before we get into the essays, so that there's context, right? Because we realize that so much of the inside baseball stuff that we talk about in the interviews, the footnotes do a good job of explaining, if we mention a spell or something that someone who does not play D&D wouldn't have context for. But we wanted to set the stage a little bit for this period of D&D, from around 2015 when I started working at Wizards to now. Yeah, and that wouldn't have happened without Meredith.
Yeah, it's one of the recent episodes we did was we basically did D&D autocomplete, where you type in D&D is, and you see what the most common Google questions asked are. But one of the pieces of info that came out that was really surprising to me was the median age of people that play D&D now. My assumption would be that with it going as long as it has, that would be ever increasing. Wildly wrong. I also realize it's probably because that age range doesn't have the responsibilities I now have, and that's probably why they play more. But that's a whole nother podcast. But the idea that that basically 20s to 30s age range is still the most prominent play category in terms of age is so interesting because of how, like you're saying, how different that group is, every 10 years, that cycle of what's most important to them. Because I think like 15 years ago, we didn't even have social media.
Exactly. Right. And how much that changed.
Yeah. So it's
everything.
really interesting to see it develop and the people that bring new ideas into it and evolve it into that next iteration of not even mechanically speaking of just what playing D&D is. And that's like, how do you explain it? Do you want to tell me what playing D&D is today? Or do you want me to tell you what playing D&D was 40 years ago? Because those are two different books, not just, even paragraphs.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to say, in response to your thought, Neal, about it's continuing to skew younger. I had one of my eye-opening experiences with sometimes students of journalism will be like, oh, I have to write a paper about, or I have to write an interview. I want to interview D&D because I love, I'm like, okay, sure. I'll do a mock interview, even though it's a real interview for them. And one of the questions I got from this 19-year-old college student was like, can you tell me why it's so popular on campus right now and every single person is playing Dungeons and Dragons? And I was like, oh, really?
Can you tell me?
Yeah, I was like, I didn't know that was.
I go to the University of Florida, so I can't tell you that.
Exactly. And it seemed like they didn't have the context of me being, older and not really experiencing that. When I was in college, they were just like, it's happening. Everyone is doing it. And I was like, wow, okay, there really is. And of course we capture as much data as we can working on the D&D brand. And we knew it was younger, but that for some reason cemented that fact to me where I'm like, oh, there are this entire generation of people who honestly even know who Shelly and I are because of this podcast. And that blows my mind when, I have a niece or a nephew who's in high school and they're like, oh, my boyfriend now knows who you are. And I'm like, what? That doesn't make any sense. How does that compute from Florida? What? So there is this constant reimagining and reinvigorating of the D&D community. And we're hoping that's been a tenet of what Dungeons and Dragon Talk has been for Dungeons and Dragons this whole time, is that come on in, come play, be a part of this. It doesn't matter what background you come from, who you are, the color of your skin. Let's play Dungeons and Dragons together because I think it is a net good for humanity out there. And it's really great to be able to have this book to be maybe another guidepost along the way of like, oh yeah, if you're D&D curious, you might want to start up a group and join one.
I mean, I just hearing you guys talk about the internet fame that comes with it. Like I have a friend of mine who I met. I'm doing a program through a college out in LA, so I had to go out there for an intensive recently. Met him for the first time. He's in his 40s, and his 15-year-old daughter was like, hey, I'm really curious. Like, she loves D&D. She watches Critical Role all the time and like is really interested in D&D, but never had a group to play with, right? He grew up very rural Virginia. I grew up in like Michigan, so like Satanic Panic era, right? Of like,
totally.
You couldn't find things online because it wasn't there in the 90s. So if your parents said no, like it was no. You couldn't even like find it unless you bought the book and tried to hide it somewhere in your house. And who had $50 to like buy a book when you're 12? Nobody does, So it was interesting to hear him talk, and he's like, I was curious about it, and so because of the internet, he's like, we could go and watch Critical Role together. We could go and listen to some of these other podcasts together. And he's like, I helped him find like the Adventurers League website and find a place for him to like be able to find somewhere to do like the learn to play stuff. And he just messaged me last week and was like, that was the greatest experience that I've had with my 15-year-old who I have struggled to connect with over things for a long time, and he's like, that stuff that I grew up with, he's like, it's literally like, he's like, it's Lord of the Rings, choose your own adventure style, and I was like, yeah, that's what I tried to tell my parents when I was younger, and like, it's just beautiful that they had the opportunities. Well, yeah, I mean, that too. We just don't talk about that.
The demons.
Yeah.
I
don't even get me started on the Lord of the like.
I know.
Anyways.
I love that. I love any type of connection with parents and daughters.
But you're talking about that like internet being able to unlock this for a lot of people where it wasn't able to be done even up to like 10 years ago. It was still somewhat difficult to find digital copies of books. It was still hard to find that. And now it's become even more increasingly. And I think that definitely feeds into some of that popularity and the virtual or the viralness of something that it can pick up on, and the beauty of those sorts of opportunities that have come because of the change in technology and the intentionality of Wizards to really, in ways that they probably didn't have to, D&D would have survived, but they, decided to invest in things like a podcast and social media platforms and whatnot that have helped get it out to families of dads who are having a hard time connecting with their daughters, who now they have this thing they can go to regularly and play together. That's
amazing. And talk about together. And that's the other really powerful thing about Dungeons and Dragons is that generational appeal, is that a lot of the fans that discovered D&D in the 80s and the 90s, 70s, 80s, 90s are parents, and their kids are starting to discover it, or they're introducing their kids to it. And just like the story you just told, like, it is that wonderful connection point that you can have with your kid, but also it's like just rediscovering it through their eyes, which people always said, like, before you had kids. I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, come on. Like, finally, I can see out of like 2020 eyes and not like the 15 pairs of contacts I have to shove in my eyes every day. But I get it now.
That's too many contacts.
You should not real
I'm not wrong.
I think there was an article the other day about a doctor pulling 12 off of a patient.
Well, that actually makes me throw up.
Yeah.
Put that in your Wild Beyond the Witchlight campaign.
Yeah, there you go. Somebody wearing 15 contacts.
They're just like sticking out like so far out of their eyeballs. Hello, kids.
I love that too. I mean, and that's why this book, what I like about this book too, is because it becomes a record of that moment in time, right? I started at Wizards the same week that Critical Role first aired on Twitch. And so there was this moment of like, oh, this is a sea change. This is where things kind of, grew and changed because of that ubiquitousness of being able to watch people play Dungeons and Dragons and listen to people play Dungeons and Dragons has really helped that growth and encouraged it going forward. And so, yeah, that's a big part of what we discuss in this book, as well as, many of the guests that we talk to are known because of being streamers or being front and center and being part of that proselytizing about why D&D is so cool. And so, yeah, that to me is also a really big fun part about this book, is it being a record of this moment in time.
So you had already kind of brought it up, but what was there anything else, surprising to either of you when you start to look back? Because I know for it's happened several times, and we'll just admit it on air, and that's totally fine. There may have been several times where we're like, we've never talked about that topic, and then we definitely just talk about it again and create a whole nother episode about the exact same thing, which is typically fine because it's years separated, and we have a different guest on, and it's a great podcast. But were there things that surprised you, similar to my example? Or like just looking back at those times and then like really delving into, because like you said, you're thinking about like how that, not just what was said, but how you felt about the things that were said, and so looking back, especially over that span, were there elements that surprised you in doing basically the research for the book?
I think some of the things that surprised me and getting to talk to people every week about their D&D experiences was I suspected it. I always suspected it and was never able to put my finger on it. But continuing to hear the profound impact this game has on people's lives. And it's just like, every week, like, blows your mind that this little game that we're just out here making is like really having these deep emotional impacts on people's lives in very, very positive ways. And it's just, we're very lucky. I consider Greg and I to be two of the luckiest of all the wizards because we get to talk to these amazing people from the community who are just so willing to share their passion, their excitement, and their experiences around this game. I think that all really came to a head, especially when we talked to Rufus Hound, who Greg writes about so wonderfully in the book. He is a British comedian, actor, and I'm not going to spoil it. Please listen to that episode if you haven't listened, and if you really want to hear Greg and I openly weeping on the podcast.
Along with him.
But like that story was like, holy cow. Like it's more than just entertainment for people. And I just think that is so important. So the surprising thing is how little this feels like a day job to me, that I'm absolutely excited to come to work every day and continue to find ways to bring Dungeons and Dragons to more people, especially the kids.
I'm gonna +1 on that for sure. Like, it is wonderful to get completely reminded each time, each week, that what we're doing in marketing this book for our jobs is meaningful. It's not just, a day job for us. It just feels like, oh yeah, we constantly get reminded of how cool that is. But one thing that was surprising, going back a little bit more of just a detail kind of tidbit type of thing, was going back to the interview that we did with Rainn Wilson. It was one of our first interviews that we did. He was promoting a book, so it was part of his book tour. I still love the fact that I think he just did it because he thought it would be a lark. Like, I talked to the D&D podcast, to promote my book. How funny is that? But I think I didn't even realize I wanted to write about this and listen to it again. And he said that Dwight Schrute was based on a D&D friend that he had in the Pacific Northwest. And
that's awesome.
I was like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot that detail, that D&D inspired one of the most iconic characters in American sitcom television over the last 40 years. Really, I don't want to overstate the importance of The Office, but it really was like, oh my God, I can't believe that this experience that Rainn Wilson had playing Dungeons and Dragons as a kid, and the relationships that he made then informed something that is, in so many people's daily, memes and life, like The Office.
Part of me wonders if that person in his D&D group really annoyed him to no end when they were actually playing in a group.
I think so, honestly. And but because he lost touch, and actually in the essay and in the interview, he's like, "Hey, open call to this." He names the person, and he's like, "I've been trying to get in touch with you."
So funny.
And it's still like, hey, if that person wants to get in touch, they certainly still can, and be a little bit more open.
Person who's obsessed. Stop talking about Battlestar Galactica and beats. I don't care.
Battlestar Galactica. Well, the funniest thing though is, if there's one person through my entire D&D career that is most likely to just pluck out and put into a sitcom and be a character and require no editing, their name is Dwight. So I don't know what to do right now. I'm having a bit of a moment.
Maybe it's the same person.
No, he doesn't live far enough north. But the other thing I will say that is a much more serious thing, because it kind of echoes on itself, because it was a piece of advice that I had mentioned offhandedly, only to hear someone bring it back to me and say it was the best piece of advice that they have ever heard. And I think it applies to certainly all four of us right now. But as a content creator, one of the things is the content you create has the potential to be more meaningful for the person that consumes it than it will ever be to you. So the things that you guys do with Dragon Talk, there is a chance that it finds a person at the right time in the right way. And those individual episodes become more important, because you could have been having the worst day, but you're already scheduled and you're going to go through it, and you're a professional and you can make it happen. It sounds great. It gets edited. Of course it sounds great, but it can find that person in just the right way and become more important to them than it could ever be to you. And so that is one of the weirdest and best things about being a content creator. And it's always something to keep in mind, is that what we do will inevitably mean more to someone than it could ever mean to us. And that's just wild.
Yes. That's beautifully said. Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's true even of being a dungeon master as well. The number of times that I've had people come to the table, it's like, I just needed this today, to just sit down and play. And how many times I've just needed that to run a game, and to say I just needed this today to just
totally.
It could have been the worst day or the worst week or whatever, and you can sit down and play at a table and say, this was the most meaningful thing probably to somebody, maybe of an entire week, because it wasn't them dealing with whatever other stuff that happens in normal everyday life, good, bad, or otherwise. Yeah. It's a good word.
That became so apparent during the pandemic, and in many ways, this book is a pandemic book, because we were writing it from around September 2020 to we completed it in 2021. So it was certainly on our minds, and many of the guests that we talk about here, we interviewed during that time. One of which was B. Dave Walters. I think I mentioned this before, but he had this amazing ability to be a guest on Dragon Talk when we needed it most, in weird ways. He talked us up, and the one that I'm thinking of was I think maybe April or May 2020. And he said such amazing, wonderful things about just the fact that we were continuing making Dragon Talk while the rest of the world shut down. And it was what I needed to hear at that time. And one of the reasons why I think he is not just the fighter mage thief of the D&D community. Took a long time for him to level up, and he's the most powerful person there is. But he's also a fighter mage cleric because he was able to inspire us so well of being that almost spiritual guidance of being like, what you all are doing, just talking to people and continuing to be excited about Dungeons and Dragons during what was a really hard time for a lot of people externally was important. And just like what you're saying, that it can be meaningful, just the fact that there is content out there to be experienced at the right moment and the right time.
Yeah. It was probably hard for him too. Like it was hard for everybody, but yet he still found it within himself to like continue to lift people up. Oh, B Dave, we love you.
Agreed. And then you meet him in person, and just like every Zoom call, you figure out, wow, I'm not as tall.
You're really tall.
I'm very short. Good to know. Didn't know that. Now I do.
Keep looking up for days.
So, and then my most important question to round us out is, where can people go to find all the stuff that you both are doing, and then certainly the best place for them to go get the book?
So, Welcome to Dragon Talk is the book. It is subtitled Inspiring Conversations About Dungeons & Dragons and the People Who Love to Play It. It is officially published on December 5th, but you can pre-order it now from the University of Iowa Press website. Your local retailer, you can pre-order it from there. We love everybody in the local book selling community. So certainly support your local bookseller. You can get it through online retailers. And we're told if you order it now or pre-order it, you can actually get it before December 5th, so up to a month early, actually, we were told. So it's out there. It's available. Again, December 5th is the official publication date, but you know, if you want to jump out there and buy it now, you can. And then myself personally, I'm at Greg Tito on Twitter, Greg_Tito on Instagram, and you can find out about all the fun stuff that we're doing about Welcome to Dragon Talk, as well as the short film I mentioned earlier, Ex-Husband film, and I do a Star Trek rewatch podcast called Re-Engage that you can find out about through my social media. That
is super random. I'm going to say, if you need someone, you just let me know. My greatest childhood memories are watching LeVar Burton in the morning and watching LeVar Burton at night. Because those were my days. I'm like, oh, here he is, and I would watch him, and then I would watch TNG with my dad at night. So those are my some of my favorite childhood memories.
Does the same roles in both shows?
It kind of does. Right? It's one he happens to be wearing a visor.
Amazing.
So. You don't have to take my word for it. You can't do that with the warp engine right now.
That is amazing. Did you mention Dragon Talk? I mean,
yeah, you can watch, listen to Dragon Talk every week. No, you do go ahead.
Yeah, you can listen to Dragon Talk anywhere that you listen to podcasts. So yeah, give it a listen. Definitely, if you read the book and listen to Dragon Talk, you will find, oh yes, I remember that episode. There'll be some familiar stories in there, and hopefully these are ones that connected with you too. And you can find me on social at Shelly Moo on Twitter or Instagram, and you can find if you want to see some of those Bachelor recaps or talk about Bravo Television, go to my website at shellymazzanoble.com.
Perfect. And then we'll have links. We'll have links to the show notes where you can. I'm like one click away from having the book apparently show up at my door in like a week. So we'll have. Well, like I said, we'll have all.
Please
those
let us know.
I point to the show notes like they can see me. They can't. And just go later. Go to the show notes.
You can hear it in your voice.
I can. Yes.
You definitely won't go up. You will go down. You can hear it. But again, we just want to thank both of you for coming on and spending some time and sharing those stories, like you do all the time on Dragon Talk.
Thank you.
And thank you. This is awesome. I since I've been on many years ago, I've not listened to every episode of the DM's Block, but I love when I do have the opportunity to hear all the creative stuff that you guys come up with about scenarios and campaigns, and I always get inspired. So you're doing Peller's work by inspiring everyone out there.
That's great. Our vision in 2014 is still happening today. That's good.
Working. It's working.
Very impressive.
Yeah.
Love it. Yeah.
We just want to thank Greg and Shelly again for coming on, spending some time with us, and talking Dragon Talk and Dungeons & Dragons, of course. And if you liked what you heard here, or you want to tell us your own story about Dungeons & Dragons and how it has affected you, then definitely head on over and send us an email at dungeonmastersblock@gmail.com. And of course, if you see fit, you can leave us an iTunes review that we'll read out on air. And if you want to follow us on social media, you can find us at DMS_block on Twitter, or you can find us on Facebook, Instagram. Find our Discord, just find us. We'll be there. And if we're not there, let us know in one of those ways, and then maybe we can be there as well, because who knows what wonderful social media platform is coming out next. And of course, the Dungeon Masters Block is a proud member of the Block Party Podcast Network, where you can check out other shows like Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters, Detentions and Dragons, and more. But thank you for spending some time with us and listening to the Dungeon Masters Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game. I'm DM Neal. Good night, good luck, and keep on Dungeon Mastering.
Goodbye.